The heavy oak doors of the attorney's office swung shut with a dull thud. Marcus was already uncorking a bottle of vintage Cabernet. The estate lawyer pushed a black leather folder across the polished table. It was officially over. Marcus smirked and tapped his gold watch against his crystal glass. "Looks like you get the antique lawnmower, Elias," he said. He had just signed the papers to absorb $3 million of prime commercial real estate. He transferred it directly into his own holding company. He looked at me with absolute contempt. He thought he had completely outmaneuvered me. "My name is Elias. I am 32 years old, living in downtown Seattle. I work as a senior forensic auditor. My daily job involves dissecting fraudulent corporate ledgers. I trace illicit capital flows through international shell entities. I find missing money for a living." I did not raise my voice at his insult. I did not slam my fists on the mahogany table. Emotion is a completely useless variable when dealing with hostile asset appropriation. Instead, I quietly observed his arrogant posture. I noted the careless way he signed the execution lines. He believed he had just secured the primary inheritance account. He thought he possessed $3,450,211.89 in liquid assets. He was incredibly wrong. The document Marcus signed was a standard revocable conveyance. It relied entirely on the false assumption that our grandfather's 2022 codicil was the final directive. Let me ask you a quick question. What time is it where you are right now? Are you listening to this late at night in your room? Take a deep breath. Pay close attention to what happens next. Marcus poured himself another generous drink. He was violently celebrating a victory that did not legally exist. He assumed my quiet demeanor meant I was crushed. I was simply running the accelerated depreciation schedules in my head. Marcus did not read the fine print regarding the mezzanine debt attached to those properties. He unknowingly adopted a direct federal tax burden of exactly $845,912.44. I stood up slowly from the leather chair. I buttoned my suit jacket and gave my brother a perfectly polite nod. I walked out of the office and into the cold autumn air. I had several specific forms to immediately file. The total destruction of his financial future would officially begin tomorrow. I had everything I needed to ruin him completely. My family has operated like a parasitic financial ecosystem for my entire adult life. My mother is the chief architect of this toxicity. She uses weaponized guilt to extract capital. Marcus is simply her favorite designated beneficiary. For 8 years, I was their silent underwriter. I managed their gross financial incompetence behind closed doors. When Marcus crashed his imported sports car in 2019, I did not just pay the insurance deductible. I liquidated $42,650 from my private dividend portfolio to settle the civil damages out of court. I prevented a felony evasion charge. They called it my brotherly duty. My mother constantly gaslit me about my financial boundaries. She would say I was hoarding wealth while my blood suffered. She never acknowledged the sheer mathematical impossibility of their lifestyle. In a single fiscal year, they burned through $184,300 of unearned income. They financed luxury vacations on revolving credit accounts with massive compounding interest rates. I warned them repeatedly about their unsecured debt ratio. They responded by mocking my spreadsheet mentality. Marcus claimed I lacked vision. He believed wealth was an attitude rather than a mathematical reality. He was profoundly stupid. Grandpa Arthur was the only rational actor in our genetic line. He built his real estate portfolio through brutal, disciplined compounding. He despised Marcus and his lazy sense of entitlement. He saw through my mother and her manipulations. 2 months before he died, Grandpa Arthur called me to his private study. He handed me a sealed blue envelope. He did not give me a sentimental speech. He gave me a fully notarized, irrevocable testamentary trust. It superseded every previous document in existence. He knew my mother and Marcus would attempt a hostile takeover of his estate. He anticipated they would use fraudulent undue influence to rewrite his primary will. He was absolutely right. They spent 6 months poisoning him against me. They intercepted my phone calls and isolated him in his nursing facility. They thought I was oblivious to their crude isolation tactics. I simply allowed them to execute their flawed strategy. I needed them to commit fully to the fraud. You cannot trap an embezzler until they actually sign the forged checks. Their entitlement was a highly predictable metric. I mapped out their entire psychological profile. I just had to wait patiently for the principal trigger event before I could lock the legal trapdoors permanently behind my arrogant brother. They never understood the actual mechanics of modern digital wealth. Marcus believed money simply materialized when he swiped his heavy metal credit card. My mother thought a checking account was an endless reservoir of entitlement. They completely ignored the complex digital infrastructure keeping their financial lives afloat. I built that entire infrastructure from scratch. For years, I held the master administrative keys to their entire existence. I configured the dual-factor authentication protocols for every major asset they touched. I managed the centralized password vault for Marcus and his failing import business. I controlled the administrative routing numbers for the family trust escrow. This was the unseen labor they dismissed as simple computer work. My professional arsenal was vast and deeply entrenched in their daily operations. I had root access to the specific holding company Marcus used to absorb the estate properties. He asked me to set it up for him back in 2021. He was too lazy to file the proper corporate registration paperwork himself. I listed myself as the primary technical compliance officer. This granted me irrevocable back-end ledger access. He completely forgot about this minor administrative detail. He never bothered to remove my security clearance from the corporate banking portal. He was too busy test driving leased luxury vehicles to understand access management. I also possessed the original metadata logs from Grandpa Arthur and his final months. I had timestamps of every time my mother logged into his personal banking portal. I had the exact IP addresses tracing straight back to her residential router. I could legally prove she transferred $42,885.50 to her own account while he was heavily medicated. She called it a standard caretaking expense. The federal tax code defines it as elder financial abuse. My family handed me the loaded weapon because they thought I was a quiet utility. They assumed my silence meant I was weak. They failed to realize I was essentially their private reserve bank. I verified every transaction they initiated for 3 solid years. This granted me complete visibility into their total structural insolvency. I was not just holding the administrative keys to the kingdom. I had quietly wired their economic foundation with highly sensitive tripwires. All I had to do now was stop maintaining their fragile systems. The moment I revoked my unseen labor, their artificial reality would shatter. They were about to discover the true cost of my permanent absence. I returned to my apartment at precisely 4:15 in the afternoon. I did not pour a drink or pace the floor. I sat at my workstation and woke up my encrypted terminal. This was the exact moment of the quiet severance. I opened the master administrative console for Marcus and his corporate entity. It was time to systematically dismantle his stolen kingdom. My first action was revoking the primary remote access tokens. Marcus linked his personal banking applications directly to the corporate ledger. He used my verified credentials to bypass standard security protocols. I permanently disabled his digital access with 3 precise keystrokes. I triggered a mandatory global password reset across 12 different financial platforms. His mobile device would immediately log him out of everything. He could not reset the passwords because I controlled the master domain registry. He was officially locked out of his own life. Next, I addressed the commercial real estate transfer. Marcus assumed the property titles were completely clear. I accessed the mezzanine debt portal and removed my digital signature as the secondary guarantor. I invoked a standard technical compliance breach under Section 14 of the loan agreement. Removing my financial backing triggered an immediate reassessment protocol from the primary commercial lender. The banking system automatically froze the $3,450,211.89 in liquid assets. They placed the total funds into a restricted collateral holding account pending a full underwriter review. Then I turned my attention to my mother and her endless credit lines. I had quietly co-signed her primary revolving credit account back in 2018. I filed an electronic notice of administrative withdrawal directly with the principal creditor. I cited a suspected fraudulent variance in her recent transaction history. This legally forced the bank to instantly freeze her available balance of $48,220.15. She was currently staying at a luxury spa resort in Scottsdale. Her premium credit card would hard decline the moment she tried to settle her extensive final bill. Finally, I severed the main communication bridge. I logged into the cellular network plan I had personally financed for 6 long years. I completely canceled their expensive data roaming packages. I instantly suspended their primary voice lines. I cited a continuous non-payment of internal balances. The entire administrative execution took exactly 42 full minutes. I systematically evaporated their absolute financial mobility without raising my voice or leaving my chair. I closed my laptop and watched the cold rain hit the glass of my apartment window. The digital infrastructure they relied on for oxygen simply ceased to exist. I was no longer their silent underwriter. I was the absolute architect of their imminent total collapse. Tomorrow morning, they would wake up entirely broke. There would be no warning alarms. There would be no polite phone calls explaining the suddenly denied transactions. The modern world operates strictly on verified digital trust. I had legally revoked that vital trust. My brother wanted absolute independence. Now he was going to get exactly what he asked for. The quiet severance was complete. The fallout commenced precisely at 8:14 the next morning. My encrypted server registered an incoming message from a public IP address in Scottsdale. My mother was stranded at the front desk of her luxury spa resort. Her premium platinum card had violently declined for a total balance of $4,850.22. The hotel management successfully placed a lien on her luggage pending full payment. She sent a frantic email accusing me of a simple technical error. She demanded I wire the funds immediately to avoid embarrassing our family name, but I simply ignored her desperate correspondence. 10 minutes later, the secondary intercom at my apartment building violently buzzed. Marcus had physically driven to my building because his cellular phone was completely dead. He bypassed the lobby security and began aggressively pounding on my heavy steel door. I watched his erratic movements through the high-definition security camera feed mounted above the frame. His face was bright red with sheer panic and completely unbridled rage. I activated the two-way audio channel without unlocking the heavy internal deadbolt. He screamed that I was illegally tampering with his commercial corporate assets. He threatened to call the police and file immediate grand larceny charges against me. He completely misunderstood the legal definition of grand larceny and digital asset forfeiture. He demanded I restore his back-end banking access before his outstanding vendor checks bounced. I calmly informed him that my administrative oversight contract was officially and permanently terminated. I told him he was now solely responsible for his own mandatory digital compliance metrics. Marcus hit the heavy door with his fist and tried to weaponize pure emotional guilt. He yelled that our late grandfather would be deeply ashamed of my vindictive actions. He violently claimed I was destroying the core foundation of our entire family legacy. He did not realize his screaming was being fully recorded by my local server storage. He was actively creating a highly documented legal timeline of aggressive physical harassment. My mother followed up with an emotional voicemail left from a hotel lobby landline. Her trembling voice was thick with manufactured tears and heavy psychological manipulation. She begged me to remember how much she had sacrificed for my early childhood education. She conveniently ignored the $14,200 federal tax lien she secretly attached to my college savings account. She warned me that cutting off my relatives would leave me entirely alone. I felt absolutely nothing as I meticulously archived their pathetic audio files into my database. They were running out of oxygen and resorting to highly primitive emotional extortion tactics. Their intense panic was a highly predictable phase in the standard asset recovery protocol. Marcus was currently accruing a strict penalty of $450 per hour from the commercial lender. He was mathematically bleeding out on the pavement without realizing his desperate and terminal situation. I saved all their digital communications into a deeply encrypted and highly redundant legal folder. I was patiently letting them dig their own graves with their own frantic recorded words. I immediately needed absolute irrefutable mathematical proof of their initial fraud to trigger the irrevocable trust. Marcus and my mother believed they had cleanly rewritten the estate documents. They were completely unaware of forensic ledger analysis. I opened a secure virtual machine on my secondary monitor. I initiated a deep packet inspection of the digital probate filings. I was hunting for the exact moment they compromised the system. Marcus submitted a digital valuation of the commercial properties to the probate court. He grossly understated the current market capitalization to avoid the federal estate tax threshold. He claimed the primary warehouse asset was worth exactly $1,150,000. I accessed the municipal zoning database and cross-referenced his submitted appraisal. He had manually altered the digital signature of a licensed commercial appraiser. I extracted the PDF metadata using a hexadecimal editor. A hexadecimal editor reads the raw code beneath a digital file. The file history clearly showed the document was modified on Marcus's personal laptop. It happened on October 14th at precisely 2:15 in the morning. This was an undeniable count of federal wire fraud. Next, I turned my attention to my mother and her phantom caretaking expenses. She used a joint checking account to siphon funds during Grandpa Arthur's final hospitalization. I ran a sequential Benford analysis on her last 6 months of withdrawal patterns. This algorithm flags unnatural numerical distribution in financial datasets. Human beings are terrible at generating random numbers. Her fraudulent withdrawals peaked in a highly artificial cluster. She repeatedly extracted exactly $4,999 to avoid standard bank reporting requirements. She failed to realize that consecutive structured withdrawals automatically trigger a formal suspicious activity report. I logged into the federal banking portal using my certified auditor credentials. I carefully cross-referenced every single statement against the local probate filings. I queried the master index for her specific routing number. The database returned 3 active flags tied directly to her Social Security number. She was already under preliminary algorithmic surveillance for suspected money laundering. I downloaded the transaction ledgers and formatted them into a standardized evidentiary binder. I attached the metadata proving Marcus had committed direct felony forgery. I included the algorithmic mapping of my mother and her embezzlement scheme. This was not just a collection of angry accusations. This was a mathematically bulletproof indictment of their entire existence. I possessed 112 pages of highly contextualized forensic evidence. The administrative trap was completely armed and locked into place. They thought this was a simple family dispute over a mismanaged inheritance. They did not understand that I was quietly building a federal criminal referral. I meticulously printed the final 80-page summary report onto heavy white cardstock. I placed the documents into a black leather folder. It was the exact same type of folder Marcus had used to steal my inheritance. The legal receipts were officially secured and meticulously verified. I simply sat back and waited patiently for them to make their next disastrous move forward toward their permanent financial annihilation. The ambush occurred on a Tuesday afternoon at precisely 1:45. Marcus and my mother intercepted me in the main lobby of my corporate auditing firm. They had managed to fly my mother back from Scottsdale using a high-interest payday advance loan. She looked physically exhausted and deeply frantic. Marcus wore a wrinkled designer suit that smelled faintly of stale cologne and cheap gin. They blocked the primary exit revolving doors. They wanted to stage a very public scene to force my immediate compliance. I stopped walking and observed them with absolute clinical detachment. My mother immediately deployed her carefully rehearsed matriarchal tone. She placed a trembling hand on my forearm and offered a completely fabricated apology. She claimed the sudden financial freeze was simply a massive misunderstanding between grieving relatives. She said we needed to unite and protect Grandpa Arthur and his grand legacy. Marcus nodded slowly and attempted to look genuinely sympathetic. He offered to grant me a 10% equity stake in the commercial warehouse properties. He framed this pathetic concession as a highly generous olive branch. He was actively bleeding capital and trying to plug a massive arterial wound with a tiny bandage. I did not break eye contact with my brother. I calmly explained that a 10% stake in his holding company was mathematically worthless. The commercial lender had already executed a default penalty clause against his primary accounts. He was currently accruing daily compound interest at a staggering rate of 18.5%. His total uncollateralized corporate debt load stood at exactly $1,204,550.88 as of this very morning. He winced visibly when I stated the exact numeric value of his impending ruin. He realized my back-end monitoring was still actively pulling his highly classified financial telemetry. I was completely aware of his terminal corporate trajectory. My mother realized her soft diplomacy was utterly failing to move me. Her tone shifted instantly from gentle maternal concern to aggressive territorial entitlement. She quietly demanded I restore her platinum credit access before the end of the business day. She threatened to call my senior managing partner and report me for corporate financial sabotage. She believed my professional reputation was highly vulnerable to familial gossip. She did not understand that forensic auditors are legally mandated to report observed criminal fraud. I could not restore her accounts even if I possessed the emotional desire to do so. The federal banking algorithms had already permanently locked her digital profile. Marcus stepped closer and tried to physically intimidate me with his broader frame. He told me that I was making a very dangerous and permanent mistake. I simply checked the current time on my digital watch. I informed them that my lunch hour was officially over. I stepped smoothly around my brother and walked back toward the secure elevator banks. Their false truce was nothing but a desperate tactical maneuver to regain structural control. They had officially cornered themselves. The absolute final trap was now fully operational and ready. The preliminary probate validation hearing took place on a Thursday morning. The municipal courtroom was heavily air-conditioned and smelled of industrial floor wax. Marcus and my mother sat together at the primary petitioner table. They looked incredibly confident in their stolen designer clothing. They expected the judge to issue a standard administrative rubber stamp. I walked down the center aisle holding my black leather folder. The estate lawyer glanced at me with deep professional annoyance. He assumed I was there to file a meaningless emotional grievance. I approached the clerk and quietly submitted my sworn evidentiary binder. The presiding judge opened the heavy file and adjusted his glasses. I stood at the public podium and lowered the microphone. I formally contested the fraudulent codicil under Title 18 of the United States Code. I specifically cited Section 1343 regarding felony federal wire fraud. Have you ever watched someone realize their entire life is completely over? Watch their eyes very closely. The pupils dilate rapidly, and their breathing simply stops. I handed Marcus a legally binding copy of his own forged hexadecimal metadata. I clearly stated the exact timestamp of his digital document alteration. It was October 14th at 2:15 in the morning. His smug expression instantly collapsed into a mask of pure terror. I did not raise my voice or show any aggressive anger. I simply turned the page and methodically presented the algorithm mapping. It perfectly detailed my mother and her highly structured embezzlement scheme. I read her exact withdrawal totals directly into the official public record. She had illegally extracted precisely $42,885.50 over 6 months. I produced the certified suspicious activity report from her federal banking profile. The expensive estate lawyer immediately backed away from my sweating brother. The lawyer realized he had unknowingly submitted a forged document to a sitting judge. Submitting a forged probate document is an immediate and severe disbarment offense. He formally withdrew his legal representation of my family on the spot. My mother began to hyperventilate loudly in the quiet, crowded room. She reached out for Marcus, but he was staring blankly at the forensic readouts. The judge slammed his gavel and ordered a mandatory permanent asset freeze. He officially invalidated the forged codicil based on my overwhelming mathematical evidence. He instructed the court bailiff to detain Marcus pending a formal federal inquiry. The heavy oak doors swung open at the back of the room. 2 federal marshals entered the courtroom wearing dark tactical vests. I had quietly forwarded my evidence to the local field office 48 hours ago. My brother dropped his expensive gold pen onto the hardwood floor. The public execution of their fraudulent empire took exactly 14 minutes. I stepped back away from the podium and calmly buttoned my suit jacket. I watched the marshals place heavy steel handcuffs on my older brother. Their total absolute humiliation was permanently documented in the public legal record. I felt a deep sense of absolute mathematical balance perfectly returning to the vast universe. The systemic collapse of their lives was beautifully asymmetrical. There were no hidden safety nets to stop their sudden and violent fall. Marcus spent exactly 3 days in a federal holding cell. His release bond was permanently set at exactly $250,000. He could not post the required 10% cash minimum. His commercial lender officially seized the 3 commercial warehouse properties. They executed a rapid liquidation sale to cover his debts. The lender filed a massive deficiency judgment against his estate. The total judgment was mathematically verified at precisely $612,450.22. This legally permitted the bank to garnish his future wages. He was forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy protection. This filing requires a complete liquidation of all personal assets. The court auctioned his imported sports car to pay creditors. He currently lives in a weekly motel room in Tacoma. My mother faced an equally devastating mathematical reality that afternoon. The Internal Revenue Service audited her entirely fraudulent banking withdrawals. They immediately classified her stolen $42,885.50 as undeclared taxable income. They assessed a brutal civil fraud penalty of maximum value. Her total unexpected tax liability reached exactly $38,914.15 by Friday. The State Revenue Department placed a direct administrative tax levy. They legally drained her primary checking account down to zero. She attempted to borrow emergency funds from her wealthy friends. Her former social circle completely ignored her desperate phone calls. She was permanently evicted from her luxury leased downtown apartment. Her pristine local reputation was completely and utterly mathematically annihilated. Grandpa Arthur and his irrevocable trust officially activated on Monday. The trust completely bypassed the slow public judicial probate process. The legitimate legal framework named me as the sole trustee. I immediately liquidated the primary estate assets through corporate auctions. I transferred the total resulting capital into a diversified portfolio. I secured a final yield of exactly $4,120,500.80 for myself. My family destroyed themselves trying to steal a small fraction. Their total ruin was never an act of emotional vengeance. It was the inevitable result of strict modern legal gravity. They built their entire false reality on highly unstable leverage. I simply stepped away and watched their fragile leverage break. They finally experienced the true cost of their profound arrogance. The administrative ledger was finally balanced for the first time. They had absolutely nothing left to steal from my accounts. The quiet systemic collapse of their fraudulent empire was complete. I sit calmly at my workstation overlooking the quiet Seattle skyline. The rain taps gently against the reinforced glass of my window. The encrypted terminal screen glows with a steady, comforting green light. The final digital transfer cleared my private offshore accounts at exactly 8 in the morning. My net worth now stands at precisely $5,245,612.40. I feel absolutely no remorse for the total systemic destruction of my toxic relatives. They built an artificial ecosystem that required my constant unseen labor to survive. Let me ask you a final question. Look at your own personal ledger right now. Who is quietly draining your resources while demanding your absolute loyalty? You must learn to legally sever the dead weight before it completely pulls you under. I did not scream or throw emotional tantrums to achieve my permanent freedom. I simply allowed their own profound arrogance to logically weaponize the massive federal legal system directly against them. It was a completely flawless procedural execution. Marcus is currently working the night shift at a regional logistics facility. A logistics facility is a warehouse where he physically loads heavy boxes. My mother is renting a tiny basement apartment using her meager Social Security checks. Their manufactured entitlement was completely eradicated by cold, unfeeling mathematical reality. Peace is not found through loud arguments or messy public confrontations. Peace is a perfectly balanced spreadsheet. It is the absolute silence that follows a highly successful administrative withdrawal. I close my laptop and finish my black coffee. The heavy emotional burden of my entire bloodline is officially gone. I am finally the sole architect of my own quiet existence. The trap functioned with absolute mechanical perfection. I have permanently won the psychological war. My professional work here is fully concluded.